Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Titchen. I'm a senior consultant at 100% Effective. The topic of my discussion this afternoon is how to be a more efficient business. Before we start, let's do a little bit of meeting admin. If at any time through this discussion you wish to ask me a question, if you type down the bottom, and then at the end in the Q&A section, I will do my best to answer those questions. A copy of the webinar will be available to download from our website. And if you'd like to join the discussion live on Twitter, you can do so by using the hashtag 100PCBizChat. Now, as I sat down to prepare for this discussion, I started by Googling how to make for a more efficient business. And then, as you can imagine, lots of things came up. I've just given us a small subset of the sort of things that come up. Things like give employees and customers better access to information, make it easier to work together, improve employee satisfaction. But I then thought, okay, there's a nice long list. What's really behind this? What do we really mean by an efficient business? So I tried Googling business efficiency, and I landed upon an interesting definition from Investopedia, and it defined business efficiency as a level of performance that describes a process that uses the lowest amount of inputs to create the greatest amount of outputs. Now, I like this definition for a number of reasons, but principally for three reasons, and that was the use of the words process, inputs, and outputs. Because as a master black belt, these words struck a chord to me. And it encouraged me to go back to basics, to think about what is a process. Now, a process is something that transforms inputs into outputs. And this process could be something very, very simple, one or two simple steps, or it could be 100 or even 1,000 steps. But this transformational process is at the heart of business, this transformation of inputs into outputs. Now, in business, these outputs produced tend to take the form of products and services. These outputs will only sell if they are attractive to customers. To be attractive, they must do two things. Customers must want or need the product or service on offer, or at least think they do. Customers must also want a particular product or service over the competition. So what might make customers want our particular products or services over the competition? And I would argue that there are three main things, and these are price, quality, and delivery. We must sell those at a price. These products and services must perform, and they must perform free from defects throughout the life of the product or service. Yes, and the product service must also be available when needed or desired. If we can tick those three boxes, produce outputs that are the right price, quality, and delivery, we have what I would call a saleable output. Now, this transformational process, this transformation from inputs into saleable outputs, doesn't come for free. It uses resources, and these resources cost money. Resources come in many forms: raw materials, people, machines and technology, energy, information, buildings, to name but a few. And of course, there's also a need for organisation and coordination, functions that are normally performed by service people and by management. So going back to our original definition of business efficiency, which we defined as a level of performance where a process uses the lowest amount of input to create the greatest amount of outputs, combining this with our thoughts on what a saleable output is, I then created my own working definition of an efficient business. And my working definition of an efficient business is the condition of being able to undertake some form of transformational process at minimum cost, whilst ensuring that the outputs of this transformation are attractive enough to customers to lead them to purchase at a price which can maximise profits. As a suitable metric for business efficiency, we could have cost per saleable item, per saleable output, and of course we would wish to reduce this cost. Now, once we start to think about cost per sale or output, we then need to think about how we're going to measure and allocate these costs. Now, some costs are easy to measure and allocate. Directly purchased costs, for example, are easy to measure and relatively easy to allocate to seller outputs. Example of this might be the purchase of raw materials or the purchase of external services. And it's easy to see how reducing these will enable us to become more efficient. In a hotel, for example, if we move suppliers to get laundry or telecoms cheaper, or if we move to an energy supplier with a lower charge per kilowatt hour, we can easily see how we'll become more efficient. But some costs are very difficult to measure and even harder to allocate to a sellable output, however. Things like overhead and support staff. Now, many accounting packages just aren't set up to produce this level of granularity. And therefore, many businesses make all sorts of dubious assumptions in their management accounts as they seek to allocate these. The overall result is many businesses don't really know how much it costs to produce a saleable output. So what can be done? One way to do this is to substitute time for cost, because time can be an indirect way of measuring cost. The old saying goes, time is money. And when you come to think about it, this is true. The longer we work on something, the more it costs. The longer we store something for, the more it costs. The longer we are idle, the more it costs. This has the added advantage of making the subject come alive and be of practical significance to employees, even those working in supporting or administrative roles. Time also has the advantage that we are all aware of it passing. We all directly experience it. At work, we should have the mantra that extra time spent producing a saleable output always means extra cost, and that time is proportional to cost. As we said, transformational processes take inputs and turn them into outputs. I want to spend a few minutes thinking about those inputs. Now, the inputs to our processes will vary depending on the nature of business. For accounting, this might be an invoice. In education, this might be a pupil. In customer service, this might be a phone call. In a laboratory, this might be a sample. Now, one of the generic names we can call for these inputs is a value object. And these value objects flow through our transformational process and are turned into saleable outputs. Now, I like this definition called a value object. And the reason I do it is because it gives us a useful handle when we start to think about what the transformational process is and what it should be doing. Because the transformational process should add value. Otherwise, it's not helping us in any way at all. Now, as an example, I want to give you a story, a real life story, about what we actually mean by value. I'm on a train traveling down to London late one Sunday evening, and my mobile phone goes off. And as I listen to the phone, I hear the loud screeching of an alarm, and my frantic wife shouting down the phone, the burglar alarm's gone off, and I can't stop it. Difficult discussion. After a few, let's try this, let's try that, we soon come to the conclusion we can't fix it ourselves. So we say, find someone, call the expert. Eventually the expert arrived. He charged us £115 for the visit and fixed it, and we were content to pay the money. But what were we actually paying for as we wrote out the cheque? We were paying for his travel to our house, his expertise in diagnosing the cause of the problem, his equipment, and for the new battery he fitted in order to fix the problem. But what if he'd arrived without his toolbox and had to go back again to get it? What if he had had to call a few friends or colleagues to help with the diagnosis? What if the new battery had fitted was in fact faulty? Would we have been happy to pay for the extra mileage to fetch the tools, for the extra phone calls, for the other engineer's time for the replacement battery? I think not. It helps us come to a reasonable definition of what we actually mean by adding value or a value-adding activity. And I would say that a value-adding activity is something that absolutely has to be done in order to transform the inputs into saleable outputs. It must also be something that a well-informed customer will be prepared to pay for. Now, with a little coaching, most people can analyse their own job and identify which tasks are value adding and which ones aren't. Here I've created a little table to give some examples of what we might consider to be added value and non-value activities in some different contexts. In sales, for example, gathering info regarding exactly what is required, agreeing delivery details, and taking payment, we could say are value-added activities. Going back to the customer to ask for more time or to seek to change the order or query of payment terms, we could say are non-value-added activities. In operations or production, the assembly of components in a factory, in a restaurant, the cooking of the food would indeed be value-added activities, whereas reworking or starting over due to a mistake or error would be non-value-added. In terms of administration, entering an order or customer information into the system would be a value-added activity. Having to enter this information more than once or having to correct it would be a non-value-added activity. In terms of support functions, time spent actually helping the customer would be value-added activity, and you could argue that all other time is a non-value-added activity. Now, one of the jobs that managers and change agents should do would be to help facilitate events at which the workforce are encouraged to identify what is and what is not adding value. So what we can now do is look at our transformational process, thinking about some activities being value add, some activities being non-value add, and look at the amount of time we actually spend adding value in the transformational process. This is a key question. How much time do we actually spend during the transformational process actually adding value? There's a useful metric we can use, a time efficiency metric, and this is called process cycle efficiency, or PCE for short. PCE is the value added time divided by the total time multiplied by 100 to give us a percentage. So we could say that process cycle efficiency is the percentage of time spent actually adding value. Any increase in this PCE ratio for any business process or any employee is likely to make your business more efficient. Now, so far we've looked at this concept from the perspective of the process itself and from the perspective of the employee. But what we should also do, and perhaps more importantly, is we should look at this from the perspective of the value object flowing through the process, and maybe even more importantly, from the perspective of the customer. Now remember, in retail, the value object is likely to be the item that the customer will actually walk out of the shop with. In a manufacturing plant, the value object will be the product being made or assembled. In a customer service centre, the value object could be the phone call or the inquiry. In a doctor's surgery, the value object could be the patient. And this last example, I want to spend a few moments on thinking about value and value add. Imagine you wake up 5 AM in the morning feeling pretty unwell and you make a decision that you need to see your doctor. You cannot ring the doctor until 8 AM, and this necessitates a wait of several hours before you can call the doctor. You ring the doctor, you arrange the appointment. The appointment is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Therefore, there is another delay of many hours whilst you wait to see the doctor. You go to see the doctor writes a prescription, and there's another delay as you seek the pharmacist. The pharmacist takes the prescription, and there's another delay before the pharmacist actually gives you the medicine. What you then do is take the medicine. From this entire process, the only step that's actually adding value is taking the medication. And this might take, say, 1 minute. So the total lead time, which is the total time for the value object, which in fact is the patient, to flow through this entire process, might, for example, be 5 AM to 5 PM, which is 10 hours. The process cycle efficiency, which is defined as the value added time over the total time times 100, is 1 minute over 10 hours, which if you do the sums, comes out at 0.17%. Now, from lots of study, it's been found that in the vast majority of cases in business, most of the time spent at work and most of the journey time for any value object from the initial start of the order through to delivery to the customer is in fact non-value add. People often talk about 5% or less being value added. From my experience, it's often much less than this. Most time, at least 95%, is in fact spent queuing, waiting, doing things twice, moving things around, storage, etc. Now, the traditional approach to efficiency drives is to focus on the 5% adding value. And the traditional approach is to, through things like work study, capital investment, utilization increase, and automation. Wouldn't it be more appropriate and smarter, in fact, to work on the 95%? And this is achieved through focusing on non-value added activity and seeking to eliminate it. Making sure we get quality right first time, creating flow for the value object so it doesn't stop moving between steps, and limiting inventory. Now, one of the tools we can use to help us focus and on this non-value activity and to reduce the lead time is called value stream mapping. Value stream mapping is a large topic, and I can't possibly do it justice here, but what I can do is to discuss the conceptual side of value stream mapping. Best way to think of value stream mapping is as a specialist form of process map. And on this map, we show the entire journey from supplier through to the customer. On the left, we have your supplier at the top left, and you can see the journey through that symbol of the truck of the supplier supplying to your front door. On the bottom, we can see this is our transformational process that's broken down into a number of major transformational steps as it becomes transformed from inputs into outputs. On the right, we see the journey from your back door through to the customer. In the middle, we see our planning and our resource allocation process, and we can see how this works as well. Each box contains a major transformational step, and within this we put important information such as how many FTEs or workers are in this step, how long they take, how efficient the process is, etc., etc. Very importantly, we also show by means of these triangles how much work in progress or inventory is stored at each step. At the bottom, we have a thing that's called the time ladder. The time ladder shows how much time is elapsed for an average value object flowing through the system at each stage. The higher section is the waiting, delays, non-value add. The lower sections are the processing or value-added activities. Notice the difference in units. The waiting delays is often measured in days, whereas the processing is often measured in minutes or seconds. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that the lead time, or the total time it takes for a value object to flow through this system, is 23.6 days, whereas the processing time is only 188 seconds. This example is of course a manufacturing example, but this value stream mapping works extremely well in the office as well. Now, value stream maps always come in pairs. What we have is the current state, top left, which is a description of the as-is state. And we can see here that the process cycle efficiency, which is 188 seconds divided by 23.6 days, is a very small number indeed, 0.01%. Down the bottom right, we have what's called the future state. And this is the vision of where we think this process or business should be. And we can see here that in this case, the value added time has reduced slightly from 188 seconds to 175 seconds, but the lead time or total time has reduced very dramatically from 23.6 days to 5 days. Note that the process cycle efficiency has increased from 0.01% to 4.5%. Now, is it worth all this effort? I would say yes. The Boston Consulting Group has done studies to show that if lead time is decreased by 25%, labour productivity doubles and costs will reduce by 20%. When lead time is decreased so that it is at least 50% faster than the competition, Growth is at least 3 times industry average. Profits are likely to be twice the industry average. The way to reduce lead time is by reducing the non-value added time and hence increasing the process cycle efficiency. Increasing process cycle efficiency makes us more efficient. How do we go about carrying out a value stream mapping exercise? There are 7 steps. The first is to identify the customer and the value stream. Second is to complete what we call the current state map. This is the as-is state that describes how we currently operate. The next step is to mark this up with areas for improvement and where non-value activities can be reduced. And then we create what's called the future state. This is the vision of where we think this value stream needs to be. We then create the action plan of how to get there, we execute the plan, and then evaluate and identify lessons learned. These steps here, from create the current state through to create the action plan, are typically carried out in a workshop. And this workshop usually takes a few days to complete. The workshop is usually carried out by a team consisting of managers, subject matter experts, and workers, and is often facilitated by an external consultant. How do we get from the current state to the future state? This is usually delivered by a series of action plans, Kaizen events, and demand projects. And these may take anything from a few days to a few months to implement. Action plans are used where there's no ambiguity regarding what is needed to be done and how we do it. For example, purchase of a new piece of equipment or the production of a training plan. Kaizen events are short and sharply focused team-based events, and these are used for activities such as rejigging or improving a process, reducing changeover time, the production of standard operating procedures. Demand projects are used for more difficult, nuanced, and systemic issues where the cause and solution is not known. These are useful for items such as scrap or rework reduction, reliability improvement, customer complaint reduction, or schedule optimization events. Now, these are usually carried out and facilitated by expensive external consultants. But the question is, do we really need to employ expensive external consultants? And of course, the answer is no. This is what Green Belt, Yellow Belt, and Black Belt training is here to deliver. If you train your people to become either Yellow Belts, Green Belts, or Black Belts, they will then have the skills to run these events, facilitate the creation of the future state, and then undertake the activities to deliver those. Our studies have shown that Yellow Belts typically deliver a 3-to-1 return on their investment, Green Belts 5-to-1, and Black Belts as much as 5-to-1 return on investment as they deliver these events. Now, our job is to train and support people through these type of events. And if you'd like to know more about how we can help you to avoid the external consultants and gain the knowledge to improve your business, do get in touch with us on 0800 066 37 49, or do contact us on our email address, or of course, look at our website. So let's just spend a couple of minutes summarising our journey this afternoon. We started off asking ourselves, how do we become a more efficient business? And we've addressed this by asking and then answering some key questions. The first thing we defined was, what do we mean by efficient business? And we defined this as being the condition of being able to undertake some form of transformational process at minimum cost, whilst ensuring that the outputs of the transformation are attractive enough to customers to lead them to purchase at a price which can maximise profits. We postulated a suitable metric for this as business efficiency equals cost per saleable output. We then posed a question, but these costs can be difficult to measure and allocate to saleable outputs. And the answer to this was focus on time, as time is money. This works well for fixed as well as variable costs and makes efficiency come alive for the workforce. The next question we asked was, how can we focus on time? And the way we answer this is to say that total time is the sum of value-added time and non-value added time, and that total time is lead time. Reducing non-value added time reduces lead time, and the way to measure this is by means of process cycle efficiency, which is defined as value added time over total time times 100. What forms can value and non-value added time take? We suggested you run workshops to help the workforce identify what is value add and non-valued activities in their own particular tasks. What tool can we use to reduce lead time? We suggested that value stream mapping is a good tool to do this. You create the current state and then you create the future state. How do we move from current state to future state? We do this by a mixture of action plans, Kaizen events, and dynamic projects. How can we run these type of events? And we said you don't need expensive external consultants. We can train and support your staff to become yellow belts, green belts, and black belts, so they have the skills to actually run these events and deliver these changes. So just before I take a look and see if there's any questions, do be aware that you can visit our blog, sign up for our newsletter to find blogs and features, and many features exploring all sorts of subjects, including productivity. Do contact us if you want more information. We'd love to hear about your experiences, so do join our social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook, and on LinkedIn. Okay, I've invited you throughout this event to come in and ask us some questions. Yeah, and there are one or two questions that I can see down, and I will do my best to answer those questions. I'll read the questions first, and then do my best to answer them. And it says, first question, it says, Polly from the United Kingdom, how do you measure things in the office? Excuse me. It says, how do you measure things in the office that accurately, such as replying to an email, making a decision, etc.? It's a very good question. The first thing to do, I would say, will be to identify what you think a value or non-valued activity is, yeah, and get the workforce to do that. Once you've identified that, there are a number of ways you can do this. Yeah. In terms of a value or non-value activity, in terms of timing them, one way would be to, for a period of time, would be to get people to fill in a timesheet. Yeah, so what they would do, they would then identify how much time they'll spend in over, say, a week or a fortnight doing the various different activities. And then you can add those up and then identify what percentage of time people are actually spending on value and non-valued activities. Another way would be to literally physically time people. The method for that typically is to sit there with a stopwatch, measure it, say 10 times and calculate the average. That may not be practical. The key thing is measuring to the precise second is not necessarily the most important thing. Yeah, is over a period of time, particularly for in the office, is to try to work out roughly what percentage of how much time is spent on these non-valued activities. Yeah, and then of course to seek to reduce those. The value stream mapping method works extremely well in the office, and you can use this also to help you identify, on average, how much time is spent adding non-valued activities. Another question from William says, how do you know if something is actually essential non-value added or just politics? A good question. In this talk, to simplify things, I just talked about value add and non-value add, but there are some activities that sort of somewhere between, and these are sometimes called business value add or essential non-value add. The way to judge those is that they're nearly always imposed on by some external regulator. So if something has been imposed by an external regulator where you have no choice, you have to do this, then I would define this as essential non-value add. If this has been defined by your own business to say you have to do this, then you may well challenge that, yeah, and go back and say, why do we have to do this? Yeah, can we actually stop doing this altogether? And it's always good to actually ask this question, and this hopefully should identify whether this is just down to politics or not. Alistair Smith from Warrington said, in my business, I have 500 staff What should be the breakdown of how many black belts, green belts, and yellow belts? Of course, this all depends on the nature of your commitment to Lean Six Sigma. The traditional model that came from companies like General Electric, is that between 0.5% and 1% of your entire workforce will be trained to be black belts, between 3 and 5% would be green belts, and between 5 and 20% might be yellow belts. But another way of looking at it would be to identify the opportunities. I would suggest it's probably better to train a core of people first, then use those people to show how effective they can be, and then use these people to identify opportunities. Once you've identified opportunities, then you need to know how many belts, the various different grades you need to tackle those opportunities. It's probably not a good idea just to train hundreds of belts without having good opportunities for them to work on. Next question from Stephen Haberman says, how do you determine the value add and non-value activities of the development process of a new product? In most cases, most larger companies have processes in place, systems in place for managing projects through, and usually through the different phases of this process, there are usually gate review meetings. At those gate review meetings, what you should do, I would say, will be to review those gate review meetings, and identify what the deliverables are at each stage. First of all, make sure those deliverables are actually important and that they are actually adding value to the entire process. Once you've agreed what those are, then you say that any activity that absolutely has to be done to achieve a positive outcome at that gate review could be considered to be a value-added activity, and everything else could be considered to be a non-value-added activity. In particular, what you should look out for is rework. From my experience in developmental processes, one of the major issues is rework. Identify where the rework is. Anything that's not right first time will be an example of non-value activities. If you really are interested in going more deeply into the definitions of value and non-value activities, there are what are called the 7 wastes. And the 7 wastes have been defined by Toyota, and these consist of transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. And so therefore, if you really want to go into the detail of that, I'd recommend going through each activity and looking for these and seeing how you can reduce these. Next question from Alphanese, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Carlia from Brest. How to manage and, it's all quite reading, it says, how to manage and variable efficiency in time. I think I'm struggling really to understand that question. I think what you're actually saying is, how do you manage a situation where efficiency is varying over time? This is usually due, if I understand this question correctly, and this is usually due to varying workloads. So in a business where, for example, you've got, say, a cyclic, so where you've actually got periods of when you're very busy and periods when you're not so busy. If you look at efficiency, you'll usually find that when you're busy, you're very efficient, and when you're non-busy, you're not very efficient. The only thing you can really do there is try to move as many of your costs to become truly variable costs. And of course, as you probably heard, that in the UK, there's a large drive towards what they call zero-hour contracts or flexible contracts. This drive is there to try and help move costs towards variable costs. Other models here you can use will put people on annualized hours, so therefore they work less in the non-busy periods and more in the busy periods. The idea really is, as much as possible, to be able to flex your variable costs in line with your demand. Next question from Mark Wheeler from London says, what do you think PCE should be used as? Do you think PCE should be used as a BAU KPI? I would say the answer to that is yes. Process cycle efficiency is a crucial metric, and I think wherever you use this, this will be useful. The thing, of course, with this is the definition of value add and non-value add. I think the crucial thing for this will be not to get too tied up with the absolute measure of process cycle efficiency, and don't necessarily use it for comparing one unit or one business unit or one department with another. What you should do is look at each individual unit or each individual business unit or department and make sure that their own definition of value add, non-value add and PCE makes sense, and then create that as a baseline and then monitor that and make sure that improves. Don't use it as a stick to beat people with, and don't use it as a way of directly comparing different operations. Most important thing will be to create what we call a baseline, the as-is metric, and then use this, the improvement or increase in this business, this process cycle efficiency as a way of showing progress. Next question, Daryl Benson says, Frederick, what are some of the principles that should be used while when designing a new location? By designing a location, I assume you mean by moving a business from one place to another or starting a new business. The best way to do that would be to create a process, a layout or a flow that maximizes process cycle efficiency. If you can create a process that maximizes process cycle efficiency and minimizes lead time, you almost certainly can have the best design. There are all sorts of tools you can use for that. You can use the analysis of the 7 wastes, and you can use also tools like spaghetti diagrams, etc., to help you identify that. So the simple answer to that is, create a design that allows the value objects to continually flow. So therefore the flow from input through to a saleable transformed output happens as fast as possible, with the minimum lead time and the maximum process cycle efficiency. And that comes to the end of the questions that we've been given. So thank you for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed it. As we say that in the next few hours, you should be able to download this. I will also be creating a blog shortly, where I'll be expanding this and putting a lot more detail. You might like to download that in the future. Goodbye.